Well, hi, everybody. Welcome to My Favorite Mistake. I'm your host, Mark Raven. I am drinking wine today. It's not just losing it during work from home pandemic times that are dragging out here. This is a rare thing to be drinking wine, but it's rare to be joined by a guest who knows something about wine, and he is Michael Juergens. He has what is my terms, an amazing double life. I'm going to tell you about that. He is, first off, maybe the more respectable thing is that he's a senior partner with one of the big four consulting firms where he runs the Winery Solutions practice, overseeing the portfolio of services that the firm provides to wineries. He is a certified specialist of wine, a certified sommelier, and a stage 2 candidate to become what would be the 59th American to qualify as a master of wine as that certification goes. So before I tell you a little bit more about Michael, welcome to the podcast first. How are you?
Mark, what's up? Glad to be here.
And Michael is a bad influence. He's drinking something. What are you drinking first?
I'm drinking an orange wine under protest because it's the only thing available, but I find it more tolerable than most orange wines.
And I didn't mean to inadvertently make Michael jealous, and I'm drinking a wine, as it turns out, that he really enjoys, a Pinot Noir from Christum in Willamette Valley, Oregon. So I don't mean to be waving that in front of the camera.
And a 2013, so it's got the right amount of years on it too. It's probably right in the peak spot.
Well, maybe you'll get your hands back on a bottle again soon when you're back in real home, right?
Yeah.
So you can learn more about Michael. He's got a website, drinkingandknowingthings.com. He has a book of that same name using his pen name, Michael Amon. I'll put a link to that in the show notes. And when I say double life, it's really more like triple or quadruple life here. Michael is the founder of the Bhutan Wine Company, as in the country. You're not just using the name, right?
Correct.
So we may talk, and we will talk about that later on. Leading the development of the wine industry in the Himalayan country, again, Bhutan. He owns the award-winning SoCal Rum Company, which was recently awarded 95 points, the highest point score in history for any silver rum. And he's also a professor at the, is it Paul Merage School of Business? Did I butcher that?
Okay. Yep. And actually, you want to know what's funny is literally I'm giving a final right now, and my TA is having trouble like turning the thing on. So she's texting me as we're talking, like, how do I turn this on? So it literally is.
So that life is interfering with. So that's at UC Irvine. Do you need to take care of that and let your students?
No. I text her back.
Okay.
Hopefully she'll figure it out.
All right. So Michael, even with the wine, it seems doesn't sleep and does all kinds of amazing things. So out of all of the portfolio of things in your life, Michael, what would you say is your favorite mistake?
So for me, I think the concept of a mistake or of a failure is a bit of a misnomer in the sense that, like imagine if you were teaching a toddler how to walk, you would expect that kid to fall down a lot.
Yeah. And
you would stand him back up and you would, let him keep going. And I feel like that's been my entire life. It's been just a lot of falling down and just getting back up and going for it. So when we started talking about doing this show, and I was thinking like, what's my most spectacular mistake? I'm like, shit, I have a bunch. Yeah. But I figured in the sense of what we're talking about today, I'd talk a little bit about the Master of Wine program.
Okay.
And I signed up for this program, and it's ridiculously hard to pass. There's more astronauts in the United States than there are Masters of Wine, just to put it into context, right? And so there's a stage 1. Where there's an exam, and then if you pass that, you go into stage 2, where there's a bigger, more in-depth exam. And so I passed the stage 1 the first time I took it, and then I took the stage 2, and there's 2 parts. There's a kind of a theory part, and there's a tasting part. And I passed the theory part the first time, and I have now failed the tasting part 4 years in a row. Mm. I just got my my evidence of failure this year on Wednesday before Thanksgiving. So literally like, welcome to Thanksgiving. Guess what? You failed again.
Yeah.
And so my girlfriend, she goes, like, hey, you failed. And I only have one more chance. I only have one more at bat.
Wow.
And so she was talking to me about it, and she's like, are you bummed? Like, are you upset? And I go, no, I'm not upset. Like, why would I be upset? And she goes, well, you failed again. And I go, I haven't passed yet, is the way that I look at it. And every time that I've gone through this, extremely difficult wine tasting exam, and now it's 4 times in a row I've not passed. I come back from it and I reflect and I think about, like, okay, what do I need to do differently? Like, how am I missing the ball on this? In my mind, I am one of the best wine tasters in the United States. Like, how is it that I'm not passing this? And it gets me more focused and more energized and more incentivized and everything else. Like, okay, how do we do this? And I'd love to pass, next year. But if I don't, let's say that this rolls forward to next year, I take my final at bat and I miss. And I don't get the chance to put the MW initials behind my name. But in that 7 or 8 year process, I traveled the world. I met a bunch of people. I founded an industry in a country. I wrote 6 books, about wine. Like, I got so much out of the journey that almost the outcome of the initials becomes, I don't want to say irrelevant, because it's not. It's important to me, and I want to do it. But goddamn, I had a hell of a run, right?
Yeah.
It's like being the MVP and never winning a ring. How was that? Did you win, or did you have a good time? I did.
Yeah. So, how much of this effort is a team sport in terms of tasting with other somms and talking and learning from each other and hanging out versus a solitary practice?
So it's, you definitely benefit from your peer group. Unfortunately for me, I am the only person in Orange County who is in the program. And have been, like, literally for the last 5 years. There was one guy who joined and then immediately quit. So geographically, it's been just me, but I have a virtual wine tasting group in New York, and I go and taste with them, and I have folks up in LA that I get to taste with. And we did this thing for, I don't know, probably a year and a half, where every Sunday morning at 6 a.m. my time, 9 a.m. New York time, and 4 p.m. London time, we had a 1.5 hour conference call, and I did that for 18 months. It doesn't matter what you did on Saturday night. You better get up, because 6 a.m. we're talking about wine with some folks around the world. And
you're tasting, and from what there was a book I read a few years ago, Cork Dork, about a technology technology journalist who said, I want to do something different. And no, I think she was hanging out in New York, and you've got tons of people she was getting together with in person, and they're all bringing bottles and they're all tasting and starting. We talk about Sunday morning. Fair to say your palate is fresher in the morning, or is that just an excuse to drink early?
It totally is fresher in the morning. And the other thing that I have going for me is, so my girlfriend is a WSET diploma holder. And so she knows a fair bit about wine. She's actually the CEO of the Bhutan Wine Company. And so she's been a real godsend in terms of, hey, Ann, go pour me 6 wines and, curate a flight for me. So that's been super, super useful too. But yeah, it's if you were trying to do this on your own without the benefit of a study group, I think it would be impossible. I actually really feel bad there's some Masters of Wine candidates in places like Peru or wherever. And like they don't even have good access to French wines or Italian wines. Like, I don't know how they're doing it. Like, my heart goes out to them. But I keep banging away.
Yeah. Well, and so you have, and what I hear you saying is it's sort of more about the journey than just the end result. That if you did fail last year, you wouldn't say, well, that was all a waste of time, is what I hear. Loud and clear.
It was like, it changed my life in 14 different dimensions for the positive.
Yeah.
And while it would be cool to, imagine if you ran, I don't know, pick an example. If you ran like the Death Valley ultra marathon. It's 155 miles, right, through just hell that very few people have done. And you ran 99% of it and then collapsed at the end. Like, would you sit there and go, oh, that was, I'm a piece of shit? No, you'd be like, wow, I got so close. I got so close in doing something that's very few people can do. Obviously, you would prefer to finish.
Right. But I would still be impressed hearing about that 99% journey when I spend most of my day in a cushy chair and I went for a walk today, not a run, like a walk. You know, I put on a Fitbit, which makes me feel like it's more.
Like, imagine if you climbed Everest and you got to close to the top, and then weather made you come back down. Like, would you come down and go, oh, wow?
No.
Or would be like, I got close, and that's sort of the way I feel about it. But not only getting close, I had the benefit of all these other aspects of my life opening up in so many unforeseen dimensions that it's just been an amazing ride. So
tell me about wine in Bhutan. I mean, like how this idea came to be. Did that ever feel like a mistake, or is that moving along?
Well, so you talk about making mistakes. So I actually think one of the attributes of successful entrepreneurs is the ability to fail enthusiastically. And we're definitely failing forward, and to overuse a industry term, in Bhutan. But I'll tell you how this started. So my girlfriend, we've been together for 16 years. So she's more like a wife than a girlfriend. but
we don't talk about these types of mistakes of why haven't you proposed? We won't go into any of that.
That's a success. I've avoided the ring. It's been great. So anyway, so she read this book in high school about this woman that moved to Bhutan and married a Bhutanese person. So the whole time we've been together, I'm hearing Bhutan this and Bhutan that, and we should go. It's amazing. And I'm like, I don't know what that is. I don't give a shit. Mm-hmm. And then I got an email. I've been running marathons around the world. I got this email that said, hey, we're going to run the first international marathon in Bhutan. Do you want to come? We have 10 spots. So I immediately responded and said, yeah, we're in. And so they selected us. And I go to my girlfriend. I'm like, guess what, baby? I got you your dream trip. We're finally going to Bhutan to run a marathon. And she's like, awesome. I can't wait to go to the Himalayas. And I go, what are you talking about? That's an island in Indonesia. She goes, no, it's not. It's between Tibet and Nepal. And I go, what are you talking about? And I looked it up, and sure enough, it's in the Himalayas. So I didn't even know where it was. And so we go there, and meanwhile, I'm a wine guy, right? I've been all around the world visiting wine regions, and we're going through this country that has just these amazing crops. Like, they grow the world's best crops in certain verticals. It's like this Garden of Eden in this little secluded area of the Himalayas. And so I erroneously assume there must be wineries here somewhere. I just have to find them. So I started asking everybody, like, where's the wineries? I want to visit them. And everyone's like, what are you talking about? So we end up at this dinner with these government officials, and they go, and I go like, hey, where's the wineries? I want to make sure I visit them while I'm here. And they go, we don't have any.
Yeah. And
I go, you guys are fucking up. Like, this is prime vineyard territory. Like, if you don't have vineyards here, you are wasting this terroir that God gave you. Like, you have to do this. And they go, I mean, I'm completely talking, like way above my pay grade, like telling these guys what they need to do with their country.
Right.
And they listen. And I had no intention of starting a winery. I just thought it would be cool if they did it. And that led to a conversation. And I went back to LA and I wrote a white paper on why I thought Bhutan would be perfect for growing grapes. And I emailed it to them. And that's kind of how it started.
So they have the hillsides and the climate and the soil. Those are
the hillsides, the climate, the soil, the terroir, the microclimates, the biodiversity. I mean, this is a country that grows like the world's best mandarin oranges and the world's best red rice. And I'm like, look, if you can grow the world's best fruit, you probably can grow a damn good wine grape. They just had never thought about it before. It was Marco Polo never got there on the Silk Road with some grapes. The Roman army never got there with grapes. They were isolated. And so, like I said, I never set out to make it myself. I just thought they should do it. And so a couple years later, I went back to run the marathon again because I had so much fun the first time. And all these government people wanted meetings with me. And so it turns out everybody read the white paper.
Oh.
And so they're like, hey, do you believe this? I go, 100%. Like, I've spent my life studying this. I do this. This would work. You guys should do it. And they said, well, we don't know how, like, what would we do next? And so I wrote a 10-year business plan for the country, and I identified all the work streams and all the things that they had to think about, and I emailed it all.
Spoken like a consultant.
Except for in this case, like, I wasn't charging by the hour. I just thought it would be cool if they did it. Like,
Sure.
You know, and so, yeah, I just gave them all this. I said, go, here's how you would do it. Here's your roadmap. Let me know when it's done, because I want to come, like, taste the wine. I think it'll be awesome. And they said, we want to do this. And I said, you should do it. And they said, we want to do it with you as our partner. And I was like, wow, okay, that's pretty cool. I'm all in.
So to actually start that first winery.
Yeah, to build the industry. Yeah, and the way I kind of think about it, it's like, imagine if you were a great graffiti artist, and China came to you and said, we want someone to graffiti the whole wall. And people will see it for forever. It will be a part of our culture. It will impact people for generations to come. Will you do it? Like, how do you say no to that?
Yeah. So then how many years ago was that?
So about the time that we pulled the trigger and said we're going to do it was maybe 2017, 2018, somewhere in that time frame. So
you're a couple of years into that 10-year plan.
Yeah. So we actually, our first 6 vineyards just finished their 4th season. And then I have 2 more vineyards that just finished their 2nd season.
So was there a decision to decide, like, where to import vines from?
Dude, the importation of vines was a goddamn nightmare. Mm-hmm. Nobody would take me seriously. I would email people and say, I'd like to purchase some grapevines and for my winery in Bhutan. And they would be like, you're a Nigerian prince and you need us to send you some money. And so like, I spent months trying to find someone that would work with me. And finally I drove to one of the biggest nurseries in California. I just got in my car and drove there and said, take me seriously. This is who I am. This is what I'm doing. This is not a scam. Mm-hmm. Here is some money. Like, sell me some goddamn vines. And so that finally is what worked to get that done. But then there's also Bhutan's the only carbon negative country in the world, and on track to become the first 100% organic country. Mm. So like, they're very protective of their natural, flora. Right. Yeah. And I'm saying, I'm going to bring in some alien species and stick them in your stuff. And so we had to kind of work through all of that and how we were going to do it, and how we were going to control it, and everything else. And so there was a lot of work that had to be done. I mean, I'm trivializing it now, but it was a nightmare. Like, it took so much work to get all the pieces together to put a vine in the ground. Mm-hmm. When I planted the first vine, which was Merlot, by the way, it was like, I remember sticking it in the ground and just thinking, like, oh my God, we did it. Holy shit, we did it. It was crazy.
Wow. Yeah. And so when you think of, and I had to Google this because I don't know if, no offense to the Kingdom of Bhutan, I don't know if I could point it out on a map. That's just an American thing, I guess. And it's a highly Buddhist country. So I wonder, this idea of, failing forward, and it's not really a mistake. That's somewhat of a Buddhist philosophy, it seems. My Wikipedia understanding of Buddhism.
It is, I think, and not that I would hold my Buddhist knowledge up on a pedestal, but I think generally speaking, this idea of, the universe is going to take you where it's going to take you, and along the way expect as many failures as successes and so on and so forth is true. That being said, I'll offer a different narrative. And the different narrative, here's a crazy American punk rock guy saying, for sure we should plant grapes in this spot, and then picking a spot in this huge country and saying, right here is where we're going to plant some Merlot. If that Merlot dies, that then kind of says, see, wow, we tried. We told you it wasn't going to work, and you tried it, and it didn't work. See, so we had to kind of navigate around that. And there was a lot of skepticism as to whether or not wine grapes would actually grow there. Not on my part, on their part. And then we planted some grapes. And in two of the vineyards, the grapes started growing like Jack and the Beanstalk, right out of the gate. And everyone's like, whoa, they will grow here. And I was like, I know, I told you this. You guys were skeptical. So we needed some wins.
Yeah.
But within that, I know this has never been done before, right? So I don't know if Riesling is going to grow at 3,000 feet in Bhutan. I don't know if Merlot is going to grow at 9,000 feet. We don't know. And so I planted a bunch of different grapes at a bunch of different altitudes. And I anticipate that probably half of those grapes are going to fail at the altitudes that we planted them at. And I'm cool with that. I just need one or two to thrive and produce the kind of grapes I want to see.
So what I hear you saying, Michael, is failing forward requires some persistence instead of resignation to, well, this is what's meant to be.
Oh, 100%. 100%. Yeah. If at the end of all of this, if we came out and said, you know what, we've ruled out all altitudes above 5,000 feet, we've ruled out all white grapes, but boy, does Malbec grow well here. And we just became a Malbec producing country. I mean, that worked for Argentina. That's exactly what happened in Argentina. Or Riesling or Cabernet or what, insert whatever grape you want to in that narrative.
Yeah.
That's still a huge win.
So we're still years away from seeing a Bhutan wine imported and available for purchase, say, here in the States?
We will make our first wine next year.
Wow.
And actually, Mark, here's something super cool. So imagine if you had the first bottle of wine ever made in America. That'd be in the Smithsonian.
That's
the
historic.
First bottle of wine ever made in the Louvre, or in France, that would be in the Louvre. I'm about to make the first bottle of wine ever in a country. How great is that? And so our plan is we're going to take that very first barrel and I'm going to bottle up those bottles. Those are going to be very special, and we're going to allocate them out to probably museums and stuff. Because
dignitaries, right?
Dignitaries. Well, think about this: what country in the world that could produce wine organically doesn't today? I mean, it's a vine, man. It grows everywhere on the planet. So, everywhere that you would go, they'd be like, oh yeah, we have these vines. They're, 1,000 years old. We've been growing this grape. I mean, even in the US, it's a couple hundred years old. Or in New Zealand or Australia where we imported stuff, that's a couple hundred years ago. There's nothing today where there's a country that could grow grapes that doesn't. So,
and there's this growing list of countries. Occasionally you might have a chance. My wife and I are both really into wine, so to my listeners who aren't so interested in wine have probably already stopped listening. But to those of you who stuck with us and geek out on this stuff, I mean, to have a wine from a country like Georgia or Slovenia, you think, well, oh wow, interesting, Lebanon, or countries that are not maybe world famous for producing wine. It is being made in many, many countries.
Well, in Georgia, I mean, they've been making wine for 6,000 years in Georgia.
Yeah.
Lebanon is probably 2,000 years.
Yeah.
And still it's relatively unknown. So to be able to sit there and go here's the very first wine that's ever made in a country, I don't think that potential exists. Maybe they'll figure out how to grow wine in Antarctica or something with greenhouses, and then it'll be like this weird thing. But
a different meaning to ice wine.
A different meaning, exactly. But to be able to do that is, I think, probably the coolest wine adventure you could have.
Yeah.
today.
So wine adventures. You mentioned punk rock. You're a musician, a drummer.
Yeah, I'm a drummer. I'm a punk. Yeah, I've been drumming in punk bands for, I don't know, 20. Look at you. All right. What kind of kit do you have?
I don't have a kit right now because we're in a condo and neighbors would not appreciate that. But I've played drums my whole life. Never, no tattoos, no punk rock band, but I did marching band, jazz band, orchestra, name it. I did it other than punk rock. But
the jazz stuff, I love playing jazz drums. It's so hard. It is. I mean, punk rock is just hit it hard and fast. Jazz actually requires talent.
It's just different talent.
Different talent.
As you talk about in your book, Drinking and Knowing Things. Is that the full title of the book? Did I screw that up? That's the website.
You got it. Yeah, Drinking and Knowing Things.
Drinking and Knowing Things. There are different wines through different times, just as there would be different music for different times. I think that was the analogy you used in one part of the book. I agree with you there. It's not better necessarily, it's just different.
I used a Slayer analogy, which I think is,
there you go,
historically not a typical analogy you would see in a wine discourse.
Is that quote unquote death metal, or is that just heavy metal? I don't know.
Slayer. I mean, death metal, I think you get more to like Norway and Finland. I would just maybe call it hardcore.
Yeah.
If you're a musician, you've got to appreciate, especially as a drummer, you've got to appreciate the styles from reggae to jazz to metal. They're all very different. And I appreciate pretty much all music except for country western, because that's bullshit. But everything else is like I can find something to appreciate in.
Yeah. I
just happen to play punk.
So country music is the orange wine of music to you?
I'm going to have to write a Drinking and Knowing Things entry about that.
All right.
Country music is the orange wine of music.
I'm subscribed to your newsletter now, so I'm looking forward to reading that.
That's awesome.
In the future. So that book, there's a lot of information there, but it's written in a style that's not super intimidating, and that's one of the things you wrote about in the book there. That it's a mistake to create this. Just to make it intimidating, to create this mystique around you're not holding your glass the proper way, so therefore you're not worthy of learning about wine.
Or you're not doing the ritual correctly, or you ordered the wrong Chardonnay, and so therefore you're an idiot. Yeah, if you go to Europe, wine is just an integral part of the country. You've been there, right? And you walk into a cafe and there's a cheap jug of acceptable cheap red wine or white wine on the table, but you can also go and get something super fancy. And no one really makes a big thing out of it. It's just kind of there. Mm-hmm. It's a joyous thing. It's part of how you interact with people. And in the United States, all we have is sort of this snobby echelon of wine. And I think what happens is it turns off a bunch of people who would be super into it. Mm-hmm. If there weren't so many douchebags going, oh, I'm judging you because you drank the wrong Chardonnay, or you ordered a Gruner instead of a Chardonnay, or whatever. And so what happens is you're going to your work Christmas party. You got to bring a bottle of wine. So you go to the store and you're like, I'm going to get the Silver Oak because everyone's going to be like, they're all going to give me a high five when I walk in with that. And I'm going to get the Alexander Valley because it's $80 instead of the $150 Napa Valley wine. But I'll look good and everyone will compliment me. And then everybody brought the same wine. And I want to be the guy bringing a Hooligi or a Colares to that party going, try this. Mm-hmm. What do you think of that?
Yeah. And so the term you use in the book, wine douchery.
Wine douchery.
Is something that would be, you view it as a mistake, but it seems like in a lot of cases that's sort of the norm, default culture. One thing you wrote about that resonated with me is we all know that person who's, I only drink big, bold California cabs. So it's sort of like saying all I ever eat is hamburger, right?
Correct. And all I ever eat is Wagyu hamburger. And it must be, from this Wagyu herd or whatever it happens to be. What's crazy to me is like the people that do that, they're like, oh, I just got this 98 point wine. let's open it. And it's like a 2018. And you're like, dude, that wine's barely drinkable in 10 years. Like drinking it now, it's terrible. But here's my theory on this, Mark. So I think that everywhere else in the world was making wine for thousands of years. And America was the wild, wild west. And in about the late 1960s, Mondavi came out and said, you know what? Like, we can also we're as good as the French. And everyone's like, no, you're not. And so they had to over-index on the douchiness and the spectacle and the pageantry and the mystery and everything else to get credibility. And it worked. And we got credibility, and now we're on the main wine stage too. But we haven't been able to pull back from it and say, okay, we don't need to do that anymore. We've proven ourselves. We don't need to keep proving ourselves. Let's have fun with it. And we're not doing that.
Yeah. So in the book you talk about there are no rules, but it sounds like maybe the closest thing to a rule is drinking a wine when it's too young. Or is there a time to violate that? Or
too old, right? I think, but you're always guessing, right? Like wine has this lifespan and you want to drink it at the peak. So maybe that would be, if there were a rule, that would be it. Like try to guess the peak.
There's some statistic that says something like a vast majority of wine in the United States is consumed within 3 days of purchase.
It's like 80%. Yeah, it's like 80 or 90%. Yeah.
So people generally aren't going to a store that adds the value-added service of, hey, we've been aging this properly for 8 years, buy it now and drink it. Most people are buying wines that maybe are meant, I don't know if meant to be aged is the right way of saying it, but would be at their peak when they're aged, as opposed to a lot of wines that can be consumed at a much younger age, right? Not meaning the age of the drinker, but the age of the wine.
yeah. We're going to make a wine for the second grader population. No, I think you're right. And there's, if in fact that is the case, one could argue you'd be better suited if you were an American wine producer trying to make a wine that was approachable young, because people would enjoy it more. And it would be cheaper to make too. So you could sell it more cheaply.
And then, I think in the, you talk about, I'm not trying to encourage snobbery, but there's kind of a middle ground as maybe with all things. I remember when my wife and I first started really getting into wine, we lived in Phoenix and there was a little kind of local gourmet grocery store there. And the woman who ran the wine department had just moved from Napa Valley where she had run a tasting room. And so anyway, so there she is in Phoenix and super helpful. And as we got to know her a little bit, she would say her biggest joy is helping somebody find a $30 bottle that's amazing instead of just spending more. So there's maybe this middle ground where we don't have to drink the snobbiest, most expensive wines. But one other statistic that comes to mind is like the average selling price of a bottle of wine in the US is well under $10. So I wonder how much, like looking for this middle ground, if we have friends who say, like, I don't like wine. Well, if they tried a $20 or $25 bottle, maybe they would? Or is that just...
I think, so there's a ton of people that say that I don't like wine. And for me, I think that theory is bullshit. Because let's assume that you drink alcohol, right? So there's a lot of other reasons why you might not like wine, right? Sure. But let's assume that you drink alcohol, beer or spirits or whatever, but you don't like wine. There's a broader range of wine options than anything else. You can get red or white or orange or bubbly or super, super sweet or super, super high alcohol, or there's this huge range of styles. And I think that when people say I don't like wine, what it means is I have not yet found a wine that I like.
Yeah.
But also I'm too intimidated to try a bunch of different stuff. I tried one and it wasn't for me, and so I'm out. Actually, I tell a story in the book about a friend of mine who for years would tell me that he didn't like wine. Like, I just don't like it. I don't like it.
Right.
And I kept telling him, like, dude, you just haven't tried enough stuff. There's wine out there for you. And we ended up having dinner one night at this place, Atelier Crème in San Francisco, which is a super high-end restaurant. And the sommelier was coming over and I was geeking out with him. So he starts bringing me all kinds of stuff. And he brought me a glass of Tokai Azul Essencia, which is like a really syrupy sweet wine.
Mm-hmm.
And I said to my friend, like, you've never had something like this. Try this one. And he tried it. And he's like, oh my God, I get it. Like this wine spoke to me. I'm like, yeah, but it's a syrupy sweet wine. It's not like this big red wine. So like you've never had that before, but now you understand. And he's like, yes, I understand.
Well, and there's people who would say they don't like Chardonnay, but all they've ever had is kind of the stereotypical California over oaked Chardonnay. And then when they try a French Chablis, which is the same grape, but a different style, different terroir maybe, but definitely a different style of production with little or no oak, they might say, oh, well, now I do like Chardonnay. So it's so hard to generalize.
Well, what's awesome is every time I have one of those people like over at my house, they're like, oh, I hate Chardonnay. I'm like, okay, cool. I'm going to get you a Chablis. Try a Chablis. Try this. And they're like, oh, I love this. I'm like, that's also Chardonnay. Numbnuts.
Boom.
It's a different.
Wine punked.
So there's a town in near Rioja where every year they have a wine fight. So the whole town stays up all night partying, even the old people. And at 7 a.m., everyone dresses up in white and they go out in the vineyard with squirt guns and water balloons and buckets full of wine, and they have a massive wine fight. To me, that exemplifies how we should be thinking about wine. It is fun. And somehow we have drained the fun out of wine in the United States. Yeah. But imagine this, like, dude, you live in LA, right?
Yeah.
Imagine if there was a wine fight in Temecula. Would you take the drive down for that? In a heartbeat, right?
Sure. Yeah, well, I try it once.
Yeah. But like, somehow we're not doing that. And I think it's a bummer, because I think if we did, more people would be into it.
But on the flip side of that is, as you touch on in the book, and something I believe very strongly as well, that champagne should not just be reserved for celebrations or New Year's or special events. Like champagne can be an aperitif before a meal. It can be consumed with a meal. My wife and I, we're talking to wine people, and they maybe they say, "Oh, we drink a lot of wine." That's a good thing. Let's say, not too much, but a lot. So, but champagne is a regular part of that rotation. So my theory, I want to get your reaction on, is that people would say, well, I don't like champagne, or only drinking the $4 drugstore bottle with the plastic cap that gets opened on New Year's and poured into coupe glasses. And like, well, that's garbage. That would be like somebody having Bud Light and saying, like, I don't like beer. Like they're drinking the Bud Light of champagne.
Right. Or eating, I don't know, tacos made with the lowest grade ground beef, and then saying, I don't like tacos.
I don't like tacos.
And like, well, have you tried the Wagyu taco? That's pretty good. Like, no, I haven't. Let's try that. Yeah. So, but this is the whole point. Like in America, that person tries that glass of champagne out of the coupe at the wedding and goes, I am not into this. Yeah. And so then they conclude champagne is bullshit.
Yeah.
But it's not. If you have a Grand Cru vintage champagne with a steak, that is a mind-blowing experience.
Yeah. So when we talk about different products people might have tried, let's talk about rum. I'm curious to hear a little bit about starting the distillery. Let's say somebody's had some really cheap sweetened rum with all kinds of garbage spices in it, and they would say, maybe I don't like rum. How you're trying to address that with SoCal?
We're also addressing this. Yeah. So you have to understand the production cycle for rum. So back in the day, like down on the plantations hundreds of years ago, they would grow sugarcane, because it was the only thing that they could grow. Then they would harvest the sugarcane. When you harvest it, there's some clear juice that runs out of the sugarcane, and that's the best. And so the village would use that for the highest value kind of use. Mm-hmm. And then you can kind of press it, and you can get a little bit more out, and then that's the second press, and you can get it's not quite as good as the first. And you go all the way down to the end, the fifth press, where you boil the sugarcane and you grind it up and you mash it down, and the product looks like mud, and it's called blackstrap molasses. And then when you've extracted every other possible use from it, then you would make alcohol out of what was left. And that was the traditional way of making rum. And then that liquor is so bitter that you have to cut it with a bunch of fruit juice, sweet fruit juice, to make it palatable. And that's why we have daiquiris and so on and so forth. That was the historical way of making it. And so when we started making rum, literally, this is just me being dumb. I go, what if we use the first press? And everyone's like, oh, you can't do that. It's way too expensive. And I go, well, how much more is it?
Yeah.
And we did the math, and it was like a nickel a bottle.
Yeah.
And so I go, we're going to make it with the first press. We're just going to try making it with the clear stuff. And all of a sudden, it was the best rum in the world. I would love to say that we were geniuses and we figured this out, but it was just me going like, what if you don't start with the crappy leftovers?
Yeah.
Like, and then what we found is that rum doesn't need a bunch of sweet fruit juice to cut it, because it's not bitter and shitty. And so we did, I'll tell you this story, Mark. This is pretty funny. We went to this bar in Newport Beach, and we did what we called the vodka challenge. And so we got a really well-known premium vodka and our rum, and we put them in like boxes, like the Pepsi challenge. And people would come in and we'd be like, all right, you want to take the vodka challenge? Which one do you like more? And inevitably, 90% of the people liked the rum better. And what was funny is they go, yeah, I always drink X. And sometimes X was the vodka that we were pouring it against. I'm not going to say the name, so I don't want to like be an asshole. But and then I pull the boxes off, and they'd be like, "Oh, that's rum." I'm like, "Yeah, it doesn't have to be like." Get rid of your preconceived notions and your self-limiting beliefs. Like, there's cool stuff out there. Try stuff. We even made a cool video out of it, of like the reveals, where there's like a whole string of reveals and watch people just go, oh, wow.
Yeah.
A lot of fun.
So there's kind of a theme that ties a lot of this together, I think, Michael, as you put it, doing away with the self-limiting beliefs. Because at some point you could have said, I can't go study to be a master of wine. I'm a Deloitte senior partner. I don't have the time. I'm too busy. You didn't do that. You're helping Bhutan get out of the self-limiting belief, or it just hadn't occurred to them maybe, oh, we can't grow wine here. It just hadn't. And maybe the same thing here about distilling rum in a different way.
Yeah, people are like, I'm not a rum person. Like, well, how do you know? Like, have you tried every rum? Try this version. Like, oh, wow, yeah. And I think it's kind of a philosophical view of the world, which says if you truly could get out of your own way, what could you accomplish? And not just in the sense of being entrepreneurial, but just living a richer, more full life.
Just jotting that down. If you could get out of your own way. Maybe if I didn't feel the need to take so many notes, I would get out of my own way as
no, I
managing the podcast here. But so much cool stuff that you have going on, Michael. I definitely want to at some point hear an update from you about taking the exam again next year.
Yeah. So it's always offered in June, and they always release the results on the Sunday, well, basically Labor Day morning, but they release it England time. So this year they pushed the thing back because of COVID, and so we took the test in September, and they released it the Wednesday before Thanksgiving. But yeah, I'll take the test for the last time in June, and I'll find out. I'll either stay up late on Sunday night till 1 o'clock in the morning, or I'll wake up Monday morning, and we'll see what happens. But yeah, I'd love to pass.
I hope I hope you do too. We'll be rooting for you, and we can do a follow up at some point next year.
We can do a live. You and I can stay up late drinking on Sunday night, live stream the whole thing and wait for the results to come in, and I'll open them on live on the show and hopefully be elated.
Yeah. So what, maybe a final question here about wine. We've established that orange wine is not your preference. What special wine would you have open in anticipation of that moment of getting good news, or just something that you really enjoy drinking? I know you said, I read enough of the book. You said the question of what's your favorite wine is a bullshit question. So I'm not asking exactly that, but what wine?
What would I drink? I mean, I have a tattoo of a Burgundy vineyard across my chest, right? So Burgundy would probably be my go-to. But I would say in that particular instance, I might also have a bottle of champagne open and ready to go, just because it's celebratory, or something else interesting. I don't know. That's a really good question.
Well, you have
some time. I got 9 months to think about it. So
yeah, you got time to think about it. And champagne can also be used to drown sorrows. I hope it doesn't come to that.
Famous quote. It's like, I only drink champagne when I'm thirsty or when I'm not thirsty. It's like Catherine the Great said that, or something like that.
Sounds like a Winston Churchill-ism, or
it was kind of a Churchillism, but it was a woman that said it, but I can't remember who.
There's also a lot of great Winston Churchill wine quotes, because he famously started every day with a glass of champagne.
Yeah, and there, of course, there's the "Madam, I am drunk, but you are ugly, and I'll be sober in the morning," which is, I just think, fantastic.
Yeah. So one other question for you, Michael, before we go, and I should have asked this early on, clearly something in your life sparked this passion about wine. What was that?
So so everybody that I know that is really passionate about wine can trace it back to a single experience where they tried something and it sparked something in their brain and it woke them up and it spoke to that side of their brain. And I think that we're neurologically wired for this too, and that's why we've been making wine for 10,000 years. Mm-hmm. And eons, literally, before we had written language, we were making and drinking wine. So mm-hmm. I think the human brain is wired for that connection to happen if you can spark it. And so for me, I know exactly what that day was. It was my father had gone to Italy. And he was not a wine guy. And somebody there gave him a bottle of 1975 Gattinara. So this would have been in about 1992. Mm-hmm. And he brought it home, and it was wrapped in yellowed plastic. It looked fancy. And he said to me, "Mike, I got this bottle of wine. It's old. Old wine is good. We should drink it." Mm-hmm. And I go, "I don't drink wine. Wine's bullshit." And he said, "Well, give it a try with me. Like, I don't drink wine either, but I'll try it." And I go, "Okay, Dad, I'm in." And he goes, "Let's smoke cigars, because cigars and wine go great together." And I go, "Okay." And my mom, I remember this too. Like, I remember all of this, vividly. My mom goes, "If you're going to do that, you go in the garage." So we sat in the garage, and I unwrapped this bottle of 1975 Gattinara from the yellow plastic, and we poured it into red Solo cups. And I remember smelling it and going, "Huh." And then I tasted it, and I was like, "Oh, wow. I understand why people care about this beverage." I, at the time, didn't care about it, but I was like, okay, there's something here. And that sort of led to me just digging deeper and deeper and deeper, as well as you can, like when you're a 22-year-old kid with no money and trying to explore. And that, once I started working at a big firm, you get the expense account and dinners and stuff, and you can kind of gradually increase your game. And I kept doing it. And I would say I've been fortunate enough. We call those wines epiphany wines. I've probably been fortunate enough to have that experience 5 or 6 times in my life. And you never know when it's going to happen, and when it does, it's this sort of magical event where everything slows down and you can remember who you were with, what you were eating, what we were saying, everything about it. It's just solidified in your memory forever. And it's awesome. I don't know if you've had a similar epiphany experience with wine, Mark, but
nothing that, nothing, not a moment that I can remember vividly like that. I did not grow up in a household that my parents didn't drink wine regularly, if at all. They have a little bit more in their retirement. They've gotten a little bit more into wine. I think it was a little bit. It was more gradual.
But you didn't have like. There's never been an experience like when you were in Burgundy or when you were in Champagne, like you were sitting on a balcony and you had this wine. It was just spectacular, and you were with the person that you love. Like you've had those moments where it's just like, holy shit, everything is perfect.
Many, many amazing moments, but nothing that was like this epiphany that said, "Oh my God, now I've discovered wine." Like there wasn't anything dramatic. But I can think back, like in college, when I was probably able to just legally drink. I remember going to a BYOB Italian restaurant with a bottle of Chianti and having leftovers to bring home, which, I was easing my way into it. And I threw it in, my dorm fridge, which was probably 40 degrees. And I remember even then, like kind of a friend kind of tisking me like, "Oh, you don't need to refrigerate that after you've opened it." But my wife and I did our honeymoon in Napa and Sonoma just over 20 years ago. And we still love going back there. But what that did then was started to pique our curiosity to explore different regions, different countries, and just to see the differences. So I don't have an answer to that question of what's your favorite wine, because my favorite wine might be the one that you would offer me. And if you could pour me a glass through the Zoom window, like, here, this is something new. I do have certain wines that I have preferences for, but I'm still finding those moments. And there's something to be said for corny or cheesy, if you will, like meeting the people who make the wine and being at the place where it's made creates a connection. And it could be, you could frame it in terms of marketing. They've created consumer loyalty. But there's something special about meeting somebody who's the 13th generation of winemakers, and it's just it's who they are. That moments like that are very cool.
If you can taste wine where it was made with the person who made it, that is the best that wine is ever going to be. It doesn't matter if it's a $6 wine or a $600 wine. That is going to be the best. But you know what I think it is? I truly believe there is neurological wiring that is primitive tribal shit, that is like when we were in tribes together, somebody would make some wine and the tribe would get together and they would share it together, and like that is the vestiges of that are still there. And when you're at a winery, and I would tell you, everybody that's listening to this podcast right now has that experience where they're at the winery and the wine is delicious and they join the club and they get the shipment later and it's not as good, right? How many times does that happen to you?
Well, so it's vacation mode versus the end of the workday mode. Who knows? But
but I think there is something that speaks to how we interact and just experience life.
I mean, look at nature. Birds will eat fermented grapes and get drunk, or fermented fruit and get drunk, and maybe enjoy it. But there's that social dimension that we bring to it as humans.
And it's an intoxicant, which is also dope. So win-win.
Yeah. All right. So our guest today has been Michael Juergens. Go check out his website, drinkingandknowingthings.com. You can sign up for the fun emails that will help teach you about wine. The book is out there on Amazon. There's a volume 2 now of the Drinking and Knowing Things.
It's a pre-order. It'll be out in March.
So I hope people will go check that out. So Michael, it's been a lot of fun. Thank you for sharing some thoughts. Maybe you've helped, change people's perceptions about what might be mistakes or not be mistakes about the wine world and the things you've done. So it's been a lot of fun. Thank you.
It's been great, Mark. Thanks so much for having me.
Sure.